Hello everyone and welcome to the lecture on AWS Identity and Access Management, AWS IAM, and this is part 1 of 2. So this lecture is divided into 2 parts. So this lecture will contain all these topics and this is for both part 1 and part 2. So what is AWS IAM? Service availability, cost, why should I use IAM, how IAM works, ways to authenticate, AWS console sign-in methods, sign-in and account ID access for IAM users, root user login, IAM user login, IAM components, IAM users, IAM user groups, IAM roles, role terms and concepts explained, types of policies, identity-based policies in AWS, resource-based policies in AWS, IAM permission boundaries, service control policies in AWS organizations, understanding ACLs in AWS, session policies in AWS IAM, JSON policy document structure, granting least privilege in IAM policies, refining IAM permission strategy, AWS managed policies example, customer managed policies example, inline policies example, security best practices in IAM, root user best practices for AWS, and tasks requiring AWS root user credentials. So this is the simplest definition of what is IAM in general, and this is about who can access what or who can do what. So subject, object, action or the verb in between. So what is IAM? AWS Identity and Access Management is a service from Amazon Web Services designed to help you securely control who can access your AWS resources. IAM is used to control who is authenticated, meaning who can sign in, and who is authorized, meaning who has the specific permissions to use certain AWS resources. It provides the system for managing this control. When you first create an AWS account, you start with a single identity called the root user. This user has complete access to everything in the AWS account and signs in using the account's email and password. It is strongly recommended not to use this root user for everyday tasks. Keep its credentials safe and use it only when absolutely necessary. IAM identities. Instead of using the root user daily, you should use IAM to create other identities like administrators, analysts, or developers. You grant these identities only the permissions they need to do their specific jobs. When an IAM user tries to access AWS, they first need to authenticate. This happens when they provide their sign-in credentials, and AWS matches these credentials to a trusted principal, like an IAM user, a federated user, an IAM role, or an application. After authentication, when a user requests access to a specific resource, an authorization check happens. The relevant AWS service checks if the user's identity has been given permission to access that resource, looking at any policies that control their level of access. Once a principal, which can be user, role, etc., is authenticated and authorized, they can perform actions on resources within your AWS account, such as launching new EC2 instances, changing IAM group memberships, or deleting S3 buckets. Service availability. IAM, like many other AWS services, uses an eventually consistent model, achieving high availability by replicating data across multiple servers within Amazon's data centers around the world. When changes are made to IAM, they are committed and safely stored when successful, but these changes must be replicated across the entire IAM system, which takes time. This affects operations like creating or updating users, groups, roles, or policies. AWS recommends following best practices when working with IAM, including avoiding IAM changes in critical, high availability code paths of your application, implementing changes in a separate initialization routine that runs less frequently, and verifying that changes have propagated before allowing production workloads or workflows to depend on them. Cost. AWS Identity and Access Management IAM, AWS IAM Identity Center, which is AWS Single Sign-On, and AWS Security Token Service, AWS STS, are features of your AWS account offered at no additional charge. That means they are free of cost or free of charge. You are charged only when you access other AWS services using your IAM users or AWS STS temporary security credentials. IAM Access Analyzer, which is also a feature of IAM. So Access Analyzer, external access analysis, is offered at no additional charge. So this is also free. However, you will incur charges for unused access analysis and customer policy checks. So in summary, both IAM related services like single sign-on and actual service and access analyzer, everything is free of charge. Only using this, what you access under the hood like AWS EC2 or S3 bucket, you will be charged for that only, but this service is 100% free. So why should I use IAM? It enables secure shared access to your AWS account resources without sharing your primary password or access keys. It allows assigning granular permissions, giving different users varying level of access to specific AWS resources. It provides secure credentials for applications running on Amazon EC2 instances to access other AWS resources like S3 buckets or DynamoDB tables. It offers multi-factor authentication, adding an extra security layer by requiring a code from a configured device or a FIDO security key alongside a password or access key. FIDO stands for Fast Identity Online. It is an open standard for authentication developed by the FIDO Alliance. The primary goal of FIDO is to reduce the world's reliance on passwords by providing stronger and simpler authentication methods. FIDO utilizes public key cryptography to enable secure, passwordless, and multi-factor authentication experiences. This can involve various methods such as biometrics, fingerprint, facial recognition, security keys or mobile devices, enhancing both security and user convenience. It supports identity federation, allowing users with existing identities, for example from corporate network, internet identity provider, or your own company directory like Active Directory or some other data store, to gain temporary access to your AWS account. It provides identity information for assurance through AWS CloudTrail logs, which record who made requests for resources based on IAM identities, that thus helping audits. It supports PCI DSS compliance, validating its capability for secure processing, storage, and transmission of credit card data. So PCI DSS stands for Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard. So how IAM works? IAM provides the infrastructure necessary to control authentication and authorization for your AWS account. The IAM infrastructure is illustrated by this diagram. So first we start with principal. This is the AWS term for a person or application that is authenticated using an AWS account or federated user identity. Authentication. So this step involves verifying the identity of the principal trying to access the AWS environment. The principal can be authenticated through various means like a user sign-in credential or a role that a user assumes. Request. So once authenticated, the principal makes a request to AWS. This request includes the actions or operations the principal wants to perform and on which resources. For example, a request might be to access a specific S3 bucket or start an EC2 instance. Account ID. The account ID is a unique identifier associated with an AWS account. Every request is tied to an account ID, which is AWS account ID, which specifies under which AWS account the action is to be taken. Authorization. So this step involves determining whether the authenticated principal is authorized to perform the requested actions. Authorization is governed by policies which can be. So these are the types of policies. Identity-based policies. So these are attached to IAM users, groups or roles and specify what actions are allowed or denied. Resource-based policies. These are attached to a resource like an S3 bucket and specify who has permissions to access that resource. And other policies, these could include permission boundaries, organization service control policies, session policies, and so on. So I'll be covering in detail in next few slides later. Actions and operations. So actions for the console or operations for the API or CLI. These are the specific tasks that the principal wants to execute, which could be anything from launching an EC2 instance to creating an IAM user. So that diagram here lists some examples like run instances, create user and create bucket. Resources. These are the AWS resources upon which actions can be taken. So in this diagram, you can see EC2 instances, security groups, IAM groups, roles, users and S3 buckets or objects. So there are three ways to authenticate. So there are 3 ways to authenticate with AWS IAM. So first one, AWS Management Console, and this is a web-based interface. So basically the portal itself, and you provide a username, password, and you have optional multi-factor authentication that you can configure. Next, we have AWS command line interface, and it's a terminal-based access. You need access keys, and this is a text commands based. So you use text commands to interact with AWS. Lastly, we have SDKs, software development kits, and these provide programmatic access and for automation or integration with your applications. You need API credentials, and there are multiple programming languages which are supported. AWS console sign-in methods. Different sign-in experience. So AWS Management Console offers varied sign-in experience for different user types, including IAM users, root users, IAM Identity Center users, and federated users. Root and IAM users sign-in. Root and IAM users access AWS resources through the main AWS sign-in URL with permissions to account resources. Root user credentials requirement. Signing in as the root user requires the email address and password associated with the root account. IAM users credentials requirement. So IAM users need the AWS account number or alias, their username and password for sign-in. IAM Identity Center user sign-in. So these users utilize a unique AWS access portal, selecting accounts which are AWS accounts or applications and the desired permission set for the management. Federated user sign-in. Federated users log in via a custom enterprise access portal with access to AWS resources based on their organization's policies. So sign in an account ID for account ID access for IAM users. So specifically for IAM users sign in to a web URL that requires the account's alias or account ID, ensuring direct access with secure identification. So these are the example. So account ID will have your 12-digit account ID, and you just put in the URL or the web address, or if you have the alias, you can replace with the alias, so it will look something like this. So this must be configured alias. So once it's configured, you can use either way to log in. Different user types have distinct methods to view their account ID within the AWS console, which is tailored to their access level and roles. Root users can find their account number by navigating to their username, selecting security credentials, and looking under account identifiers. Similar to root users, IAM users can locate their account number under account details after selecting security credentials from the user menu. Users with an assumed role can identify their account number by choosing support and then support center, where the 12-digit account number is displayed in the navigation pane. So even for the root user, because when you create an account first time, you cannot choose your account ID. It's a 12-digit number. So once you create an account or the AWS account first time, you can go and find out your account ID, which is a 12-digit number. And for the IAM users, if somebody has shared them the URL and if it's an alias, how they can locate their account ID. So here is an example of root user login using the root user email ID. So we will select root user, not the IAM user, and first we have to give the email address. So you can clearly see it will ask only email address. If you are an IAM user, you will say IAM user, and you have the option to enter account ID or the alias. So one of them is fine. And once you have entered, you will go to the next screen, and here you can enter your IAM user and the password. So this can be any username, or if administrator has configured your email address as your username, you can enter that here. So IAM components. So first, IAM users. These are individual or application identities within AWS, each with unique permissions. Users can directly interact with AWS services and resources based on their assigned permissions. IAM groups. These are collection of IAM users under a single set of permissions. Groups help simplify permission management by allowing a single policy to apply to multiple users, enhancing organizational security and efficiency. IAM roles. This is the mechanism for granting specific permission to AWS services, other AWS accounts, or federated users without the need for permanent credentials. Roles provide temporary security credentials that can be assumed by trusted entities, facilitating secure and flexible access management. IAM policies. Documents that explicitly define permissions attached to IAM identities. And these IAM identities are user groups and roles or AWS resources. Policies detail what actions are permitted or denied, governing the access level to AWS services and resources. They are central to managing the security and access control in AWS, ensuring that entities can only perform actions that are explicitly allowed. So first, I'll cover IAM users in detail. IAM users are created with a friendly name and are identified uniquely across AWS with an Amazon resource name. So ARN is unique for all the object, not almost all the object, and a unique identifier. And it's a pretty long, like it contains the account ID, the object type, and the actual name. These elements help in specifying users within policies or AWS environments. IAM user credentials. IAM users can have various credentials like console passwords for AWS Management Console access key for programmatic calls, SSH keys for code commit, and server certificates for SSL and TLS authentication. Administrating IAM security. So AWS provides tools to manage passwords, access keys, and multi-factor authentication devices for IAM users. It emphasizes the importance of MFA for enhancing security and recommends regular audits to find and remove unused credentials. By default, new IAM users have no permissions. Permissions must be explicitly assigned to allow users to perform operations or access resources, promoting the principle of least privilege. Each IAM user is associated with a single AWS account, facilitating resource access and activity billing without requiring a separate payment method. IAM users can also function as service accounts for applications, utilizing long-term credentials for AWS requests. Best practices include avoiding embedding access keys in application code and utilizing AWS SDKs for secure key management. IAM user groups. An IAM user group is a collection of IAM users designed to simplify permission management by collectively assigning permissions to multiple users. By using user groups like admins, permission management becomes more streamlined, allowing for easy addition or removal of users based on their role changes within an organization. Policies can be attached to user groups to grant shared permissions to all users within the group. However, user groups cannot be specified as principals in policies due to their nature related to permissions rather than authentication. User groups can include many users, and users can belong to multiple groups. However, groups cannot contain other user groups, so there is no nesting which is allowed. There is no default group for all users in an AWS account. So some systems usually have all users concept, but in AWS we don't have that. There are limitations on the number of groups an AWS account can have, and on the number of groups a single user can be member of. And this helps in careful planning and management of user groups within IAM. So IAM roles. Unlike IAM users, roles are designed to be assumable by anyone who needs them, lacking permanent credentials like passwords or access keys. Assuming a role provides temporary security credentials, enabling secure, time-limited access to AWS resources. Roles enable delegation of access to AWS resources within the same account, across different AWS accounts, to AWS services, and to external users authenticated via identity providers. Roles facilitate resource access across AWS accounts, and this allows users from one AWS account to access resources in another AWS account. This greatly enhances collaboration and resource sharing. Roles can grant resource access to mobile apps without embedding access keys and to users with identities outside of AWS, such as corporate directories or third-party identity services. And that's all. Thanks for watching. And this concludes the first part. I will resume the second part in the next lecture.